Jacob, this is a formal suspension notice for your actions.
You are suspended.
What do you mean suspended?
Jacob's suspension sparked a secret. Military choppers landed the next dawn. Ethan Carter, a 16-year-old high school junior from Kansas wheat farm, sat stunned as Principal Hargrove handed him a suspension notice on September 3rd, 2025. The charge: vandalism after a mysterious symbol was found scratched into the gym wall. Ethan protested. He'd been at the farm all day, but Hargrove's stern glare silenced him. His parents, Lila and Tom Carter, were furious, suspecting a setup. As Ethan packed his bag, he overheard Hargrove muttering about national security. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The symbol, a jagged, unfamiliar mark, lingered in Ethan's mind, its edges etched like a warning. Outside the window, the morning sun cast long shadows over the empty schoolyard, amplifying the unease in his chest. Lila's voice cracked as she demanded answers, her farmer's hands trembling with anger. Tom noticed a black SUV parked near the entrance, its tinted windows glinting ominously. A chill ran down Ethan's spine as he wondered what forces were closing in on their quiet farm life. Question: what secret could a scratched symbol hold to threaten a quiet farm town? The dawn of September 4th, 2025, broke over the Carter family's weathered farmhouse with a deceptive calm, the golden light filtering through the cracked kitchen window where Lila Carter sipped her coffee. It was 8:16 a.m. Central Daylight Time, and the air held the crisp promise of a new day in rural Kansas. Ethan, barely 16, slouched at the table, picking at a bowl of cereal, his mind still tangled in the events of the previous day. His suspension from Hayes High School for a fight he swore he didn't start. His father, Tom, sat across from him, flipping through a newspaper, his jaw tight with unspoken frustration. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the distant crow of a rooster. Then a low, guttural roar shattered the quiet, growing louder until it shook the very walls of the house. Lila's mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor as she rushed to the window. Ethan followed, his heart pounding, and what he saw made his breath catch. 3 military helicopters, their sleek black bodies glinting in the morning sun, descended onto the football field of Hayes High School, just visible across the rolling fields from their farmhouse. The thundering blades kicked up swirling clouds of dust and dry grass, obscuring the faded goalposts. Armed soldiers in dark fatigues poured out, moving with practiced precision to cordon off the area, their rifles glinting ominously. A command post was already taking shape, tents, radios, and a perimeter of orange cones materializing with alarming speed. Ethan pressed his face closer to the glass, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a familiar figure among the chaos. Hargrove, the school's vice principal, standing stiffly near the bleachers. The man's usual smug demeanor was gone, replaced by a tense posture as he spoke with a stern-looking officer in a crisp uniform, adorned with medals that caught the sunlight. The officer's gestures were sharp, authoritative, and Hargrove seemed to shrink under their weight. Ethan's stomach twisted, not just with the lingering shame of his suspension, but with a creeping dread that this was no ordinary disciplinary fallout. Lila clutched Tom's arm, her knuckles white, her voice barely above a whisper. "What have they done to our boy?" Her eyes, wide with fear, darted between Ethan and the scene unfolding outside. Tom, usually the steady one, set his newspaper down slowly, his face etched with confusion and a flicker of anger. That could only mean the school, or perhaps something larger, something connected to the military presence now invading their quiet town. Ethan's suspension, pinned on a scuffle in the cafeteria, had seemed like a bureaucratic overreach, a misunderstanding at best. But this was something else entirely. Ethan's mind raced, replaying the incident that got him sent home. A shove in the lunch line, a tray knocked to the floor, and suddenly he was the one in the principal's office, branded the instigator. He tried to explain. Someone else had escalated it, someone he couldn't quite name in the blur of the moment. but no one listened. Now, watching the soldiers set up their perimeter, he wondered if the fight was just a convenient excuse. Had he stumbled into something bigger? Something that brought this helicopters, soldiers, and a military officer interrogating Hargrove to their doorstep? Tom stepped to the window, his broad shoulders tense. "Ethan, stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. "Lila, get the keys. We're going to find out what the hell's going on." Lila hesitated, her gaze flicking to Ethan, as if afraid to leave him alone. But the urgency in Tom's tone spurred her into action, and she grabbed the truck keys from the hook by the door. Ethan, however, couldn't tear his eyes from the field. A soldier was unrolling a map, pointing at something while another set up what looked like a high-tech scanner, its lights blinking in the morning haze. The dread in Ethan's gut grew heavier, like a stone sinking deeper with every second. This wasn't about a school fight. The military didn't show up for a teenager suspension. Whatever was happening, it was tied to something they weren't telling him. Something Hargrove knew, something the officer's stern face confirmed. As his parents stepped toward the door, Ethan's voice broke through, shaky but determined. "I'm coming with you." Tom turned, ready to argue, but the look in Ethan's eyes, fear mixed with defiance, stopped him. Whatever secret was unfolding on that football field, Ethan knew it was just a phase two. Question: why would the military storm a school over a teenager suspension? The late afternoon sun hung low over the Carter farm, casting long shadows across the overgrown fields as a convoy of black SUVs roared up the dusty driveway. Lila Carter froze on the porch, her hand tightening around the chipped mug of coffee she'd been nursing. Her son, Tom, barely 12, peered out from behind her, his wide eyes fixed on the soldiers spilling out of the vehicles, their boots crunching against the gravel. Their uniforms were crisp, their movements precise, and their expressions unreadable behind dark sunglasses. At the forefront stood a man in a sharply pressed uniform, his silver hair cropped close, his chest adorned with a row of medals that glinted in the fading light. He introduced himself as Colonel Reese, his voice clipped and authoritative, demanding to speak with Ethan Carter immediately. Lila's heart thudded. Ethan, her older brother, had only been back at the farm for a week, helping her fix up the dilapidated property she'd bought on a whim to escape the city's chaos. He emerged from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, his flannel shirt streaked with dirt. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice steady but his eyes narrowing as he took in the armed men fanning out across the yard. Reese didn't waste time. He gestured to one of the soldiers, who opened the rear door of the lead SUV. "Inside, Mr. Carter. We need to talk." It wasn't a request. Lila stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He's not going anywhere until you tell us what's going on." Reese's gaze flicked to her, cold and assessing, but he offered no explanation. Instead, he nodded to Ethan, who gave Lila a reassuring glance before climbing into the vehicle. The door slammed shut, and Lila felt a knot tighten in her chest. Inside the SUV, the air was thick with tension. The leather seats creaked as Ethan sat across from Reese, the colonel's steely, eyes boring into him. A manila folder lay open on the seat beside Reese, its contents hidden except for a single photograph he slid across to Ethan. It showed a concrete wall in what looked like a gym, etched with a strange, angular symbol, a jagged, almost runic design that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. "Recognize this?" Reese asked, his tone low and probing. Ethan frowned, studying the image. The symbol was alien to him, its sharp lines and odd geometry unlike anything he'd seen before. "No," he said firmly. "Never seen it in my life." But Reese wasn't convinced. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This symbol, Mr. Carter, was found in a classified military database. It's tied to a code we've been tracking for years. And now it shows up on a wall in a gym you were seen leaving 2 days ago. Care to explain?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I work out there sometimes. I don't go around carving symbols into walls." "You got the wrong guy." But Reese wasn't swayed. He produced another photo, this one a grainy security camera still of Ethan exiting the gym, time-stamped just hours before the symbol was reported. "Coincidence?" Reese pressed, his voice dripping with skepticism. Ethan leaned back, frustration simmering. I'm telling you, I don't know anything about it. Outside, Lila and Tom stood by the porch, watching helplessly as the SUV's tinted windows hid Ethan from view. Tom clutched his mother's hand, his voice trembling. They're not going to take him away, are they, Mom? Lila forced a smile, though her stomach churned. He'll be fine, Tom. He's done nothing wrong. But her words fell hollow. The soldiers patrolling the perimeter of the farm, their rifles slung low, didn't look like they were here for a friendly chat. Reese's interrogation stretched on, his questions circling like vultures. He asked about Ethan's past, his time in the city, his odd jobs, even his dreams. Ethan bristled at the last one. Dreams? What do my dreams have to do with anything? Reese didn't answer, only scribbled something in his notebook before snapping it shut. You'll be coming with us for further questioning, he said finally, signaling to the driver. Ethan protested, but two soldiers flanked him, escorting him to another vehicle. Lila rushed forward, banging on the SUV's window, but it sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. That night, the farm felt eerily silent, the absence of Ethan's familiar presence like a wound. Lila couldn't sleep, her mind racing with questions. Tom, unable to settle, rummaged through the attic for distractions, pulling out Ethan's old backpack, a tattered relic from his wandering days. As he unzipped it, a folded piece of paper slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Lila picked it up, her breath catching as she unfolded it. There, in Ethan's unmistakable sketchbook scrawl, was the same angular symbol from Reese's photograph. The lines were shaky, as if drawn in a trance, with a note in the margin, dream. Last night. Don't know what it means. Lila's hands trembled as she stared at the sketch. Ethan had never mentioned dreams like this, never hinted at anything so strange. Was it possible he'd drawn it without knowing why? Or was there something deeper, something he'd kept from her? The farm, the symbol, the military's sudden interest. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. As she tucked Tom into bed, promising answers she didn't have, one thought haunted her. What else was Ethan hiding, and what did the military want with a symbol from his dreams? Question: what dark secret did Ethan unknowingly unlock with that sketch? The barn smelled of damp hay and forgotten years, its warped beams groaning under the weight of time. Tom knelt in the dirt, his hands caked with soil as he pried at the rusted edge of an old military crate he'd uncovered beneath a loose floorboard. The discovery had been accidental, a splintered plank giving way under his boot as he repaired the barn's sagging roof. Now, with Lila and Ethan watching, he wrestled the crate free, its weight heavier than expected, as if it held secrets too dense to be easily moved. A faded symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, like a lightning bolt trapped in a ring, was stamped on the lid, its edges worn but unmistakable. Tom's breath caught. It was the same symbol he'd seen scratched into the bunker's steel door the day before. Careful, Lila whispered, her voice tight with unease. She stood at the barn's entrance, clutching a flashlight that cast jittery beams across the dusty air. Her dark hair was pulled back, but stray strands clung to her sweat-dampened forehead. The farm, her bold purchase to escape the city's chaos and give Ethan a fresh start, now felt like a stranger's domain, whispering secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. That thing looks official, Tom grunted, finally wrenching the lid open with a crowbar. The hinges screamed, and a puff of stale air escaped, carrying the faint metallic tang of old machinery. Inside, the crate was a time capsule, a stack of yellowed maps, their edges curling like dried leaves, and a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and embossed with the same cryptic symbol. A few rusted tools, strange, angular devices with no clear purpose, lay nestled beside them, glinting faintly in the flashlight's glow. Ethan, leaning against a hay bale, shifted uncomfortably. His release from a sheriff's station that morning had come with a warning to stay out of trouble, but the bruise on his cheek and the haunted look in his eyes told a different story. He'd been exploring the farm's overgrown fields when he'd stumbled on the bunker's hidden entrance, and the military's swift arrival had left him rattled. That symbol, he said, his voice low, pointing at the crate. It was on the bunker, too. I saw it before they dragged me off. Lila's stomach twisted. She knelt beside Tom, her fingers brushing the journal's cover as if it might bite. My grandfather used to talk about this place, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He'd get this faraway look, muttering about government men who came at night, asking questions he wouldn't answer. I thought he was just paranoid, old war stories getting to him. She paused, her gaze flicking to the fields beyond the barn, with a sunset bled crimson across the horizon. But now, Tom opened the journal, its pages brittle under his calloused fingers. The handwriting was meticulous, dated from the early 1950s, and signed by Dr. Elias Marrow. The entry spoke of a classified project, codenamed Prairie Shield, conducted on this very land during the Cold War. The maps, when unfolded, revealed the farm's boundaries, marked with strange annotations, test zone alpha, containment perimeter, and coordinates that aligned with the bunker's location. One entry stood out, written in hurried scrawl. The device is unstable. If it activates, the consequences could be catastrophic. The government insists on secrecy, but I fear we've gone too far. What the hell were they doing here? Tom muttered, his voice thick with unease. He traced a finger over a map's red-inked circle, right where the bunker lay hidden. This says something about energy trials. Radiation, maybe? Or something worse. Ethan stepped closer, peering over Tom's shoulder. That's why the military showed up so fast, he said, his voice steadier now, fueled by a mix of fear and curiosity. They weren't just checking on me. They knew about this place. About whatever this is. He tapped the journal, his finger landing on a sketch of a symbol, a circle with a jagged line, like a warning carved in time. Mom, what if this has something to do with our family? Grandpa never talked about it, but he stayed on this farm his whole life. He had to know something. Lila's mind raced, memories of her grandfather's cryptic warnings surfacing like ghosts. He'd sit on the porch, staring at the fields, muttering about things better left buried. She dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man, but now those words felt like a key to a lock she hadn't known existed. She took the journal from Tom, her hands trembling as she read another entry. The child must never know. For their safety, the truth stays here. A chill ran through her. What child? Her father? Someone else? Before anyone could speak, a low hum vibrated through the barn, so faint at first it seemed like a trick of the wind. But it grew, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to rise from the earth itself, rattling the tools in the crate and sending a shiver up Lila's spine. Ethan spun toward the open barn door, his eyes wide. You hear that? Tom stood, his jaw tight, and stepped outside. The field stretched dark and endless under the twilight sky. But in the distance, near the bunker's hidden entrance, lights flickered, sharp, unnatural pinpricks of white that pulsed in time with the hum. They weren't headlights or flashlights. They were too erratic, too cold, like something alive and watching. Lila, Tom said, his voice low and urgent, get Ethan inside the house. Now. But Lila couldn't move, her gaze locked on the lights. The journal slipped from her hands, landing in the dirt with a soft thud. Whatever her grandfather had feared, whatever secrets this farm had buried, they were waking up, and they weren't alone. Question: what buried experiment is waking up beneath the Carter farm? The late afternoon sun hung low over the abandoned farm, casting long, jagged shadows across the overgrown fields. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, a reminder of the years this place had been left to rot. Emily Carter, the single mother who'd poured her savings into this crumbling dream of a new start, stood on the porch, her hands gripping the splintered railing. Her son, Ethan, was inside, engrossed in the tattered journal they'd found in the hidden bunker beneath the barn, a relic of secrets she wished they'd never uncovered. Her daughter, Sophie, was somewhere out back, probably sketching the rusted tractor or the gnarled apple trees. The quiet felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. A faint crunch of gravel snapped Emily out of her thoughts. She squinted down the dirt road that snaked through the property, her heart quickening. A figure stumbled toward the house, his movements unsteady, as if he'd been running for miles. His clothes were tattered, his face streaked with dirt, and his graying beard was matted with sweat. As he drew closer, Emily's grip on the railing tightened. She called out, her voice sharp but uncertain. "Who's there? This is private property." The man stopped, swaying slightly, his sunken eyes locking onto hers. "You gotta leave," he rasped, his voice raw, like he hadn't spoken in days. "You and your kids, get out now." He took a step forward, and Emily instinctively backed toward the door, her hand fumbling for the knob. "I'm Hank," he continued, raising his hands to show they were empty. "Used to be a soldier. Worked here long time ago. You don't know what you're sitting on." Emily's stomach churned. The military trucks that had rolled up unannounced 2 days ago, their stern-faced officers asking vague questions about disturbances, flashed through her mind. She'd brushed it off as bureaucratic overreach, but the unease had lingered. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's here?" Hank's gaze darted to the barn, its weathered red paint peeling like old skin. "Prairie Shield," he whispered, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "It was a project, underground weapons testing, deep in that bunker you found. Supposed to be a secret. They shut it down in '87 after something got loose." His voice cracked, and he wiped a trembling hand across his mouth. It wasn't just weapons. They were messing with things they didn't understand. Before Emily could respond, Ethan burst onto the porch, the journal clutched in his hands. At 16, he was all lanky limbs and fierce curiosity, his brown eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, who's this?" he asked, then turned to Hank. "You know about the bunker? This journal mentions Prairie Shield, says something about a guardian and tests going wrong." He thrust the journal toward Hank, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with cryptic notes and diagrams that hinted at experiments far beyond ordinary weapons. Hank's face drained of what little color it had. He took the journal with shaking hands, flipping to a page marked with a crude sketch of a humanoid figure, its eyes unnaturally large and glowing. "The Guardian," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's still down there. Active. Watching." He looked up, his eyes wild with fear. "They built it to protect the project, but it turned on him. It's why they sealed the bunker. You opened it, didn't you? You woke it up." Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to dismiss him as a delusional drifter, but the military's sudden interest, the strange noises at night, and the cold dread that had settled over the farm told her otherwise. "We haven't gone inside," she lied, hoping to calm him. "Just found the entrance." Hank shook his head, stepping closer. "Don't lie to me. It knows you're here. It always knows." He pointed toward the barn. "You. Stay. It'll come for you. For your kids. Get out while you still can." The creak of the screen door interrupted them as Sophie, Ethan's 14-year-old sister, stepped onto the porch. Her sketchbook was tucked under her arm, her blonde braids swinging as she tilted her head curiously. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with unease. She glanced at Hank, then back at Emily. "I saw something weird by the barn earlier. Like a shadow, but it moved wrong. Its eyes were glowing like fireflies, but bigger." Emily's blood ran cold. She grabbed Sophie's arm, pulling her close. "What do you mean, glowing?" she asked, her voice sharp. Sophie hesitated, her green eyes flickering with doubt. "I thought it was just the light playing tricks, but it was tall like a person, but not. It was watching me, Mom. I swear." Hank's breath hitched. "That's it," he said, his voice trembling. "The Guardian. It's awake. You gotta go now." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and ash, the weight of Hank's warning settled over the farm like a shroud. Emily ushered her children inside, locking the door behind them, but the flimsy bolt felt like no defense against whatever lurked in the shadows. The military's presence, the journal's cryptic warnings, Sophie's sighting, it all clicked into place, forming a picture too terrifying to fully grasp. They weren't alone on this farm, and whatever they disturb in that bunker wasn't just a relic of the past. It was awake, it was watching, and it was far too late to run. Question: what guardian lurks in the shadows, awakened by their discovery? The morning of September 5th, 2025, dawned heavy with an unnatural stillness. the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck prickle. The abandoned farm, with its sagging barn and overgrown fields, seemed to hold its breath under a sky bruised with gray clouds. Sarah, the single mom who'd poured her savings into this forgotten patch of land, stood on the porch, clutching a mug of cold coffee. Her daughter, Lily, played nearby, oblivious to the unease that had settled over the property since they'd moved in. Sarah's eyes kept drifting to the barn, where yesterday's strange noises, low, rhythmic thumps, had kept her awake long after midnight. Then it happened. A low rumble shook the earth, like the groan of some ancient beast waking beneath the soil. Sarah's mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the porch as the ground near the barn buckled. A sinkhole yawned open, dirt and roots collapsing into a dark maw. At its center, glinting faintly in the morning light, was a rusted metal hatch, its edges pitted with age. Sarah's heart thudded. This was no ordinary farm. She'd known it from the moment she found the strange symbols scratched into the cellar walls. But this was something else entirely. By noon, the military had descended. A convoy of black SUVs and armored vehicles roared up the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. Colonel Reese, a wiry man with a face carved from stone, stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. His eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, scanned the property with a clinical detachment. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clipped, "this area is now under federal jurisdiction. You and your daughter need to evacuate immediately." Sarah's jaw tightened. "This is my home. You can't just. This isn't a request." Reese cut in, motioning to his team. Soldiers fanned out, their rifles glinting in the weak sunlight. Lily clung to Sarah's leg, her wide eyes darting between the strangers. Sarah wanted to fight, to demand answers, but the sight of those weapons and the cold authority in Reese's voice silenced her. For now, Ethan, the farm's handyman who'd stayed on to help Sarah settle in, wasn't so compliant. He stood by the barn, his weathered face set in defiance. Beside him was Tom, Sarah's teenage neighbor, who'd taken a hanging around the farm, fascinated by its eerie history. "They're hiding something," Ethan muttered to Tom, his voice low. "That hatch wasn't here yesterday. I'd bet my life on it." Tom, his curiosity outweighing his fear, nodded. "We need to see what's down there before they lock it up for good." Sarah overheard them, her stomach twisting. "Ethan, don't," she whispered, glancing at Lily, who was now being ushered toward the house by a soldier. "It's not safe." But Ethan's eyes burned with a stubborn resolve. "Someone's got to know what they're covering up. You deserve answers, Sarah." Before she could protest further, he and Tom slipped toward the sinkhole, moving with the quiet determination of men who'd faced worse odds. The hatch creaked as Ethan pried it open, the sound echoing like a scream in the stillness. A ladder descended into darkness, its rungs slick with moisture. Tom hesitated, his breath catching, but Ethan's firm hand on his shoulder urged him forward. "We're in this now," Ethan said. They climbed down, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The faint hum of electricity buzzed in the distance, unnatural for a place so long abandoned. At the bottom, they found themselves in a derelict underground lab, its walls lined with cracked concrete and rusted pipes. Flickering monitors cast ghostly light across the room, their screens displaying static or looping fragments of old data. Dusty lab equipment, vials, syringes, and strange metallic devices littered the tables. In the center stood a containment cell, its reinforced. Glass doors scratched and fogged, but unmistakably empty. Tom's flashlight beam trembled as it swept the room. "What the hell was this place?" he whispered. Ethan didn't answer. His attention was fixed on a console where a red light blinked sluggishly. He pressed a button, and a crackling voice filled the chamber, distorted but chillingly clear. "Containment breach, July 17th, 1957. Entity designation, Alpha 9. Status, escaped. All personnel, initiate lockdown protocol. Do not engage. Repeat, do not." The recording cut off, leaving only the hum of the dying monitors. Tom's face paled. 1957? That's decades ago. What kind of entity escapes a place like this? Ethan's jaw clenched, something they didn't want anyone to know about. He moved toward the containment cell, peering through the glass. Scratches marred the inside, deep and jagged, as if something had clawed its way out. The air felt wrong, like it was pressing against them, watching. Above, the sound of boots echoed through the hatch. "Get out of there!" a soldier barked, his voice sharp with panic. Ethan and Tom scrambled back to the ladder, their footsteps echoing in the narrow shaft. As they reached the surface, gasping for air, a blood-curdling scream tore through the chaos. One of the soldiers, a young man with a shaved head, was gone, yanked into the shadows of the sinkhole's edge. His rifle clattered to the ground, and a low, guttural sound, not quite human, rumbled from the darkness below. Sarah, standing frozen near the barn, locked eyes with Ethan. "What did you find down there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Ethan's face was grim, his hands still gripping the ladder's rungs. "Something they've been hiding for a long time, and I think it's still here." Colonel Reese's radio crackled, his expression darkening as he barked orders to his team. The soldiers formed a perimeter around the sinkhole, their weapons trained on the hatch. But the air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had escaped all those years ago was watching, waiting. Question: what escaped entity now hunts the Carter family? The air was thick with tension as the military team, clad in tactical gear, swarmed the farm like ants over a forgotten crumb. The rusted hatch of the underground bunker, now exposed after Sophie's discovery, had been sealed with heavy chains and a biometric lock, its cold steel glinting under the floodlights they'd set up around the perimeter. Captain Reese, a wiry man with a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face, barked orders to his team, their radios crackling with static. They'd arrived at dusk, their convoy of Humvees tearing through the overgrown fields, claiming the area as a restricted zone. To Sophie, a single mom who'd poured her savings into this abandoned farm for a fresh start, it felt like her dream was being torn apart piece by piece. But the military's control was an illusion. Just after midnight, the entity struck again. A low, resonant hum, more felt than heard, vibrated through the soil, rattling the windows of the old farmhouse. One by one, the soldiers' high-tech equipment failed. Radios went silent, thermal scanners flickered out, and even the floodlights dimmed to a sickly yellow before plunging the yard into darkness. A young private swore he saw something move in the shadows, but his flashlight beam found only swaying wheat. Panic crept into the soldiers' voices, their training no match for the unseen force that seemed to pulse from the bunker below. Inside the farmhouse, Ethan, Sophie's teenage nephew who'd been staying with her to help fix up the place, fumbled with his phone, his hands trembling as he hit record. He'd seen something through the cracked kitchen window, a figure, impossibly tall and amorphous, like smoke given form, gliding silently across the field. The dim moonlight caught a glimmer on its surface, revealing a strange, jagged symbol etched into its shifting mass. The same symbol Sophie had found scratched into the bunker's walls. Ethan's footage was blurry, the phone's low-light camera struggling to capture the entity's fluid movements, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. "Aunt Sophie, you need to see this," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing hum that seemed to seep from the earth itself. Sophie, barricaded in her upstairs bedroom with her 8-year-old daughter, Lila, clutched the girl tightly. Lila's small frame trembled against her, her wide eyes glistening with tears. "Mom, I'm scared," she whispered, her voice muffled against Sophie's sweater. "What's out there?" Sophie didn't have an answer. The hum was louder now, a deep, bone-rattling frequency that seemed to press against her skull, making it hard to think. She'd seen the military's fear, heard their frantic radio calls before they cut out, and now this. Ethan's shaky video of a thing that shouldn't exist. Her mind raced back to the journal she'd found in the bunker, its brittle pages filled with cryptic warnings and sketches of that same eerie symbol. Downstairs, Hank, the grizzled old farmer who'd sold Sophie the property, sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands flipping through the journal with a grim familiarity. He'd shown up unannounced an hour ago, his pickup truck rattling down the dirt road, claiming he had a bad feeling. Now, as the hum grew louder, he tapped a page with a trembling finger. "This ain't no ghost story, Sophie," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Prairie Shield, that outfit Reese is with, they were messing with things they didn't understand. Bioweapons, they called them, but it's more than that. Something they cooked up in that bunker merged with the land's energy. Something old, something this place remembers." He paused, his eyes darting to the window as a shadow flickered past. "It's awake now, and it's angry." Reese, who'd reluctantly joined them in the farmhouse after his team's equipment failed, paced the creaking floorboards, his jaw tight. "We thought we could control it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the entity might hear. Project Prairie Shield was supposed to be a breakthrough. Genetic engineering fused with electromagnetic fields to create a new kind of weapon. But it bonded with something in the soil, something we didn't account for. "It's been dormant for years, until you opened that damn bunker." His eyes flicked to Sophie, a mix of accusation and fear. "Now it's loose, and we're all targets." Sophie's heart pounded as she processed his words. The farm she'd bought for a fresh start, a place to raise Lila away from the chaos of the city, was now a battleground for something she couldn't comprehend. The journal, which Hank had handed her earlier, described an old ritual, a series of chants and offerings tied to the land's ancient history, something the area's original inhabitants had used to appease whatever force lived here. Hank insisted it might banish the entity, but the ritual required items they didn't have: a rare herb that grew only in the nearby woods, a relic from the bunker's altar, and blood willingly given under a full moon. The next full moon was tonight, but the woods were a mile away, and the entity's hum was growing louder, more insistent, as if it knew they were plotting against it. Ethan replayed his video, zooming in on the symbol etched into the entity's form. "It's like it's watching us," he muttered, his voice cracking. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint whisper that sounded almost human, though no words could be made out. Lila whimpered, clinging tighter to Sophie, who felt her own resolve wavering. The military's weapons were useless, their technology dead, and the farmhouse's walls seemed to groan under the weight of the entity's presence. Time was running out. If they didn't act soon, the ritual might be their last hope or their final mistake. As the hum crescendoed into a deafening pulse, Sophie made a decision. She kissed Lila's forehead, promising to keep her safe, and turned to Hank. "Tell me exactly what we need for this ritual," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We're not letting this thing win." But as she spoke, the lights flickered and the shadow outside moved closer, its form coalescing into something almost human, its glowing symbol burning brighter in the dark. Question: can an ancient ritual stop a bioweapon born of Cold War madness? The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and burning sage as the sun dipped below the horizon on September 6, 2025. The abandoned farm, nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, seemed to hold its breath. At the edge of the massive sinkhole, a jagged scar in the earth that had appeared without warning weeks earlier, Ethan Carter, his brother Tom, and their friend Hank stood in a tight circle. The military encampment, a chaotic sprawl of tents and floodlights, buzzed in the distance, their attention momentarily diverted by a false alarm Ethan had rigged, a tripped sensor on the far side of the property. It had bought them precious minutes, but time was slipping away. Ethan clutched the tattered journal, its pages brittle and yellowed, discovered in the hidden bunker beneath the farm. The single mom who'd bought the property, Sarah, had entrusted it to them after unearthing it among strange artifacts and cryptic symbols. The journal's scrawled instructions had led them here, to this moment, with warnings of an entity tied to the land, a force older than the farm itself, hungry and restless. The words felt heavy on Ethan's tongue as he began the chant, his voice low and steady, though his heart pounded against his ribs. Tom, usually the skeptic, stood rigid, his eyes darting to the sinkhole's depths, where shadows seemed to writhe. Hank, The oldest of the trio held the bundle of sage, its smoke curling upward like ghostly fingers, his weathered hands trembling but resolute. The ritual had begun. The words from the journal were strange, a mix of Latin and something older, guttural, as if drawn from the earth itself. Ethan's voice grew louder, joined by Tom's hesitant murmur and Hank's gravelly tone. The sinkhole pulsed, its edges quivering as if the ground were alive. A low hum rose, vibrating through their bones, and the air grew colder, sharp enough to sting their lungs. Then it appeared. The entity materialized at the sinkhole's center, not emerging but coalescing, as if the darkness itself had taken form. Its shape was impossible to pin down. Now a towering figure with too many limbs, now a shapeless mass of writhing shadows, its edges blurring like smoke. Its presence pressed against their minds, a weight of dread and ancient malice. Ethan faltered, the journal nearly slipping from his hands, but Tom's grip on his shoulder steadied him. "Keep going," Tom whispered, his voice tight with fear. Hank stepped forward, raising the sage like a shield. The entity lunged, a tendril of darkness lashing out, catching Hank across the chest. He stumbled, but didn't fall, his face set in grim determination. "Finish it," he roared, planting himself between the entity and the brothers. The creature's form twisted, its attention fixed on Hank, who began shouting the final lines of the chant, his voice raw and defiant. Ethan and Tom joined in, their words overlapping, desperate, as the entity's assault intensified. Hank's scream cut through the night as another tendril struck, lifting him off the ground. Blood glistened in the moonlight, but he clung to the sage, his voice unwavering even as his strength failed. "Keep going," Hank gasped, his eyes locking with Ethan's. "Don't let it win." With a final, guttural cry, he hurled the burning sage into the sinkhole, and the entity shrieked, a sound that clawed at their sanity. Ethan and Tom shouted the last words, their voices breaking as a blinding light erupted from the sinkhole's depths. The ground shook, a violent tremor that nearly knocked them off their feet. The entity writhed, its form unraveling, tendrils dissolving into ash that sank into the earth. The light faded, leaving only silence and the faint smell of scorched sage. Hank lay motionless at the sinkhole's edge, his sacrifice sealing the ritual's success. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse, but Tom pulled him back. "He's gone," Tom said, his voice hollow. Tears stung Ethan's eyes, but there was no time to grieve. From the shadows, Sarah emerged, her face pale, her young son clinging to her side. She'd been watching from the tree-line, unable to stay away despite Ethan's warnings. Her eyes met his, filled with a mix of awe and horror. "It's over, isn't it?" she whispered. Before Ethan could answer, the sound of boots crunching on gravel broke the silence. Colonel Reese, the military officer who'd arrived days earlier with his convoy, stormed toward them, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded, his men fanning out behind him, rifles at the ready. The sinkhole was still now, its edges smoothed as if nothing had happened, but Reese's eyes lingered on it, then on Hank's body. "This site is under federal jurisdiction. You've compromised everything." Ethan stood, the journal still in his hand, its weight a reminder of the truth they'd uncovered. "Compromised," he said, his voice steady despite the grief. "We stopped it. You knew what was here, didn't you? And you did nothing." Reese's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned to his men. "Secure the area. No one speaks of this. Not a word." He glanced at Sarah, then at Ethan and Tom. "You'll sign NDAs, or you'll disappear." "Understood." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "This is my land, my home. You can't bury this." Reese's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a low rumble echoed from the sinkhole. Not the entity's return, but something else, a settling, as if the earth itself were exhaling. The farm fell, silent again, too silent, the kind of quiet that presses against the eardrums and makes the skin crawl. Reese's men hesitated, their flashlights flickering across the now-empty sinkhole. Ethan exchanged a glance with Tom and Sarah. They knew the truth, even if Reese's cover-up would bury it beneath layers of red tape and threats. The entity was gone, but its shadow lingered, in the journal, in Hank's sacrifice, in the questions that would haunt them. What had the military known? Why had they come only after Sarah's discovery of the bunker? And what else lay hidden beneath this cursed land? As the military cordoned off the sinkhole, Ethan tucked the journal inside his jacket. The farm was quiet now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the earth was watching, waiting. For what? He didn't know, but he swore he'd never let it catch them off guard again. The military convoy rolled out at dawn, their heavy trucks rumbling down the dirt road, leaving clouds of dust swirling in the crisp morning air. They called it a training exercise, a curt explanation delivered by a stone-faced officer to the gathered townsfolk at the edge of the Carter farm. The words hung hollow, unconvincing, as if the truth had been swept away with the tire tracks. By noon, the soldiers were gone, their presence reduced to a few discarded ration wrappers caught in the tall grass. But the town of Willow Creek buzzed like a disturbed beehive, whispers of conspiracy and cover-up weaving through the diner, the general store, and the pews of the old church. Some swore they'd seen lights in the sky the night the bunker was uncovered. Others claimed the military had hauled away crates under tarps, their contents unknown. Sophie Carter, however, stood silently by the farm's gate, her hands tucked in her jacket, watching the horizon where the trucks had vanished. The weight of their visit lingered, heavier than the autumn chill. The Carters, Sophie and her teenage son, Ethan, threw themselves into rebuilding, not just their farm but their place in the community. The barn, once a crumbling relic where the hidden bunker had been discovered, became their focus. Sophie envisioned transforming it into a community space to honor Hank, her late husband, whose memory seemed to hover over every choice they made. With the help of neighbors, they cleared the debris from the sinkhole that had swallowed half the barn floor, hauling out splintered beams and rusted tools. They replaced the sagging roof with fresh cedar, its scent mingling with the earthiness of the fields. By winter, the barn stood anew, a sturdy, open hall with long wooden tables, string lights looped across the rafters, and a small plaque by the door that read, Hank's Haven, for Willow Creek forever. The first gathering, a potluck with steaming casseroles and laughter, felt like a victory, a reclaiming of their home from the shadows of the bunker's secrets. Yet, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that the farm held more to tell, its soil whispering truth she hadn't yet unearthed. Ethan, meanwhile, found a measure of redemption. His suspension from school, a consequence of his reckless exploration of the bunker that had sparked the military's arrival, was lifted after Principal Hargrove's sudden resignation. Hargrove's departure was a quiet scandal in itself. The grizzled administrator, known for his stern demeanor and cryptic warnings about the farm, left a brief letter citing personal reasons. But the town hall meeting, old Mrs. Delaney swore she'd seen him packing his car with a nervous haste, muttering about knowing too much. Ethan overheard snippets of gossip at school. Hargrove had once worked at a military base, some said, and his late-night drives to the Carter farm before the bunker's discovery hadn't gone unnoticed. Ethan kept these rumors to himself, but they gnawed at him, especially when he caught his mother staring at the barn with a faraway look, as if she, too, sensed unanswered questions. One frosty morning, as Sophie sifted through the sinkhole's last pile of rubble, her fingers brushed against something smooth and metallic. She pulled it free, a locket, its silver surface tarnished but warm to the touch, as if it had been held moments before. Her breath caught. It was identical to the one she'd found years ago, the one she believed belonged to Mary, Hank's mother, who died under mysterious circumstances on this very farm. She opened it with trembling hands, expecting to see the faded photo of a young Hank inside. But the locket was empty, its interior gleaming like it had been polished by unseen hands. Sophie clutched it to her chest, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and wonder. She'd always felt Mary's presence on the farm, a flicker of warmth in. By September 15th, 2025, the ranch had transformed into a beacon of life and renewal. Golden wheat swayed in the fields, the barn gleamed with fresh red paint, and the laughter of Sophie, now 12, echoed through the sprawling acres. After years of struggle, the family had turned the once neglected property into a thriving haven, a testament to their resilience. But beneath the surface of this hard-won peace, an undercurrent of unease lingered. Strange occurrences had never fully ceased. Whispers carried on the dawn breeze, faint and unintelligible, as if the wind itself spoke secrets. At night, footsteps crunched through the fields, too deliberate to be dismissed as animals, yet no one was ever found. The ranch was alive, but it was not entirely theirs. Ethan, now 17, stood taller than his father, his shoulders broad from years of working the land. His eyes, however, carried a weight beyond his years, a quiet vigilance born from the horrors they'd faced. He believed Mary's spirit, his great-aunt, whose tragic story had unraveled in the ranch's darkest days, still lingered. Not as a malevolent force, but as a guardian, her presence woven into the creak of the floorboards, the flicker of the lantern light. Ethan felt her watching, protecting them from the entity that had once threatened to consume them all. He never spoke of it aloud, not wanting to alarm Sophie or their father, but he carried a pocket knife etched with Mary's initials, found in the attic years ago, as a talisman against the unknown. The family had chosen to honor Mary's memory by framing her locket, its tarnished silver glinting with a history they'd pieced together through old letters and tearful confessions. It hung above the fireplace, a solemn reminder of their survival through the nightmare that had tested their bond. The locket, once a vessel for the entity's hold, now symbolized their triumph, a fragile victory over the darkness that had seeped into the ranch's foundations. Every evening, as the fire crackled, Sophie would glance at it, her young face a mix of curiosity and reverence. "It's like she's still with us," she'd say, her voice soft but steady, no longer trembling as it had in the early days. One crisp autumn night, under the glow of a harvest moon that bathed the fields in an ethereal orange light, the family gathered on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the distant hum of crickets. Sophie, wrapped in a quilt, leaned against her father, her eyes fixed on the moon's swollen silhouette. Ethan sat apart, whittling a piece of cedar, his knife catching the moonlight with each careful stroke. The silence was comfortable, a rare moment of unity after years of rebuilding. Then, Sophie's voice broke through, clear and resolute. "Dad, I'm not scared anymore," she said, her words carrying the weight of a child who'd grown up too fast. Her father smiled, brushing a hand through her hair, but Ethan's gaze drifted to the locket through the window, its reflection flickering in the glass. A sudden chill ran through him, sharp and unyielding, as if the night itself had exhaled a warning. He squinted at the fireplace, his breath catching. The locket's surface glowed briefly, a soft, unnatural pulse of light that seemed to hum with a life of its own. It lasted only a moment, gone before he could be sure, but the air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. Ethan's grip tightened on the knife, his heart pounding with a familiar dread. The entity was gone. They'd banished it, hadn't they? Yet the glow, the whispers, the footsteps, they were echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. He glanced at Sophie, her face serene under the moonlight, and at his father, unaware of the locket's fleeting signal. Ethan swallowed his fear, forcing a smile. "Good to hear, Soph," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. As the family returned inside, the fire's warmth did little to ease the cold knot in Ethan's stomach. He lingered by the fireplace, staring at the locket. Its surface was still again, but he could feel it watching, waiting. The ranch was theirs, but so was its history, a history that might not be done with them yet. Somewhere in the fields, a faint whisper carried on the wind, and Ethan knew, deep down, that the echoes would remain. And at his father, unaware of the locket's fleeting signal, Ethan swallowed his fear, forcing a smile. "Good to hear, Soph," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. As the family returned inside, the fire's warmth did little to ease the cold, knot in Ethan's stomach. He lingered by the fireplace, staring at the locket. Its surface was still again, but he could feel it watching, waiting. The ranch was theirs, but so was its history, a history that might not be done with them yet. Somewhere in the fields, a faint whisper carried on the wind, and Ethan knew, deep down, that the echoes would remain.